Hello, and welcome to another edition of Phishing for Answers. Today, I've got a very special guest, a field or advisory CISO with Akamai Technologies, Steve Winterfeld. I was getting to know him a little bit before the podcast, but I'd love to maybe give him a chance to sort of introduce himself, and maybe I'll start it off with the same question I always started off with: how'd you get into cybersecurity?
You know, I got my first computer, which was a compact luggable when I was in high school. And I remember at the time I spent, I don't know, a couple $1,000s back in the day. But I spent so much money because I wanted to get a 10 megabyte Winchester hard drive so I would never have to buy more storage for the rest of my life. Uh,
Use
so
that in a second now.
And so, it's less about how I got into it because it was a very different era. And I do want to share a couple things. First of all, for people that are thinking about going into cybersecurity, really there are three kind of areas that typically people will go into. You'll go in to be a builder. You're going to be an engineer, a code developer, and you're going to build the infrastructure that we use within cybersecurity. You're going to come in and you're going to help with policies and compliance, and you're a lot less technical, but you're going to drive the program and you're going to make me survive auditors, and I'm going to love you so much. And then the last group is the analysts, the SOC analysts, the forensic analysts, the people that want to spend all day solving puzzles and back in the day looking through logs, but now trying to figure out where the logs are because it's such a hybrid environment. And
Isn't that the
so
truth?
and so as you come into it, those are kind of the three broad areas that I would stop and think about your temperament. And that's a great way to approach what you want to do. And then once you know what you want to do, there's a ton of training you can do. You can go out and volunteer with different nonprofits to get skills. And you can, one of the best answers I heard in an interview was, um, I've learned so many skills in my home lab. And I was just like, okay, that's somebody I don't have to worry about them learning the next generation of challenges. Um,
That's true. Whenever they have a home lab, that's a good sign.
and then the other one I'll talk about is people that are actively in your career. And then I like to talk about your North Star. So a lot of us, I'm like, how'd you get here? Well, I took this opportunity. I fell into this opportunity. A friend introduced me to this person, and we just kind of stumble through our career. And I would encourage you to manage your career and sit down today and say, what do I want my last job in cybersecurity to be? And if it's a CISO, then you need to go get leadership skills and budgeting skills and a skill set to be a CISO. If it's a CTO, then you don't need as much leadership. You don't need as much budgeting. You need more, hard skills. You still need project management, but you need hard skills. If you want to be the CEO of your own company, again, radically different skill set. And so think about that last job you want and use that to guide your skills and what jobs you accept. But anyway, I didn't answer your question. I jumped into my passion project. So I'll turn it back over to you.
No, I actually really like that. Just reminding people to be strategic because you're right. Too many people don't think about where they want to be or plan out how they're going to get there. There's a lot of sort of reactive sort of nature where, whatever comes their way, that's sort of where they go. And so, great advice. I guess let's just dive right in. And it sounds like this is going to be a fun subject. I always like to ask about carrot versus stick. And so I'm curious, if you had to pick one, which one are you going to choose, carrot or stick, and why?
So, so I love the binary aspect of a black and white world. I'm going to
It's
argue
not
the
true.
world is gray. I'm going to argue that the world's gray. And I'm going to say uh, it depends on what industry I'm in. If I'm in a highly regulated industry, healthcare, finance, I would say that one person can make a mistake and have an attitude of not caring about security, and one strike and you're gone. There's other environments, retail, some that aren't necessarily quite as regulated, or life and death, and there I would say I would probably try to build a culture of inclusiveness and all of that. Um, so to me, it kind of depends on where you're at, and really, ultimately, so much of this is driven by culture.
Yeah.
I I'm not going to determine the carrot or stick. That's really probably going to be a bigger culture fit. I've been in some amazing companies. I was a CISO for Nordstrom Bank and ran a lot of Nordstroms. Ran threat intelligence and incident response for Charles Schwab. I'm here at Akamai now. I've been in some amazing customer first cultures that honor innovation, and really you have employees that have been there 20 years.
Yeah.
And so in those, I think it is more leaning into the culture, and you can't build a culture with a stick.
I think that's a great answer. And there are times, I know I oversimplify it and make it all black and white, carrot or stick. But there are times where a stick is needed. I think where I really come at it from is I feel very strongly, and one of my passions is around how we need to lead with that carrot. We need to do more to build walls, or I'm sorry, not build walls, build bridges instead of barriers. I said the exact opposite of what I meant to there. But, our security programs are so often overly technical. Our security awareness training is overly technical, and when we train somebody about a phish, we spend too much time on the details. And as we do that, it makes that employee not care. And I don't think it's that they want to they have any malicious intent most of the time being the key word. But it's more that people don't like to feel stupid. And I believe that the way Hollywood glamorizes cybersecurity, it only adds to the sort of, I don't know, divide or gap between the InfoSec team and the average employee. Does that make any sense?
So it does. So when I think the most effective training I've ever done, and still to date, is the technique I use whenever I can, is let's talk about how to protect your loved ones online.
Uh,
And and then when I'm training them to train their family how to stay safe online, they're invested.
yeah.
And I'm not yelling at them like, "Hey, listen, you've got to be looking for these phishing emails." I struggle with how I monitor employees because I don't want to treat my employees like criminals, but I
Mhm.
also don't want to take unnecessary risk. I don't want to treat my employees like security is their main job, because it's not. And I don't fall for a lot of phishing emails except from salespeople when some salesperson says, uh, finishing up our conversation, I'm like, I don't remember this. Oh my gosh, I'm losing it. I open the email and it's the first contact. Um, so I mean, we all fall for phishing, and
We do.
it is so hard. And I say phishing. I want to stop, and we mentioned this earlier. Phishing is not email.
No, it's so much
Phishing.
more than email.
So I got this postcard which has a link in it to make me an Amazon shopper. This is phishing.
Yeah, it is.
I I've got text that my UPS package is delayed. It's all social engineering at the end of the day.
It is. And by the way, my favorite story, only favorite because of how crazy it was, but maybe instead of favorite, most obscure phishing story I've ever heard. This was probably about 10 years ago. This very large company had their DNS managed through, I think it was GoDaddy, and the attackers were able to send a fax to GoDaddy asking to change their DNS records, and because it came in through a fax, they didn't suspect anything. They were just like, well, it must be them, and they made those changes to the DNS records, and they were able to redirect the traffic to a malicious site. And to me, that is the perfect story to illustrate how any medium can be used for phishing. Any communications medium can phish you on it. If you can talk to somebody, they will phish you.
And it's video. Gen AI is a two-edged sword. It's empowering things like deepfake. It's empowering great security tools. It's empowering our employees to use it in ways that are unexpected and in some cases introduce new risk. There is Worm GPT. There are malicious large language models out there now. So I really think that the environment is going to get much more complex over the next 2 years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just over the last 2 days, we've seen enhanced multimodal capabilities come out of OpenAI and Google. Today, I had gone to Google's Notebook LM, and I was just asking it a question on some data, and it asked me if I wanted it to create a podcast, or if I wanted to create a podcast. I'm like, sure. And so I go to listen to it, and when I do, it asks me if I want to join live and ask questions. And so now with Notebook LM, you can interact with it. You can actually be a part of the podcast, and potentially, I mean, I can see so many use cases. Like, you could actually put this out there as a real podcast, have 3 people, and it's just you.
Well, and two of those are avatars, correct? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I will say that, and I just did a show on this. When we talk about AI, we talk about 3 things. We talk about protecting our users in our company, protecting the AI model itself, and what criminals are doing with it. Um, on that middle one, protecting the model itself, there's such a phenomenal resource in OWASP. So
Mhm. Yes,
OWASP has
there
a
is.
top 10 vulnerabilities for web pages, the top 10 for APIs, and now the top 10 for large language models. Um, Gen AI versus large language models, my definition is large language models are usually text based, where Gen AI can be audio or visual based. Um, and so OWASP just put out 2025. They just updated, and the old list was maybe 2 years old. But that's a great place to go look at how to secure your models. And when we talk about phishing, some of these models are designed to steal your proprietary data, to plug an API into your customer facing Gen AI capability and put so many queries in there, they steal how your AI model is working, and all your investment in developing an AI customer facing capability was ripped off. It's just scary.
Oh, I got one to do that the other day, because I'll play around and just sort of see, well, what can I get this to do as I learn about new tactics. Always like to put them to the test, and I had learned about this tactic to swap out words and say, okay, anytime instead of using this word, we'll use this word to evade filters. And I had started running up against some filters. So I tried well, let's switch words. And then I ask it, is there any terminology that I haven't given you that I might need? And can you just make up, give me or replacement terms for it? And this thing proceeds to dump out what I can only assume is very highly sensitive information. I was like, okay, we're going to stop there. But it's very interesting just how little control we have over some of these large language models. And I think it's not just the fear of what happens with the external threat or the nation state or things like that. One thing that I'm worried about is how do we enforce role based access controls if we're pumping all of our data into this large language model and the same executive is talking to it as a low level, somebody who just joined the help desk. It's two different levels of access, but I can see that being an absolute just treasure trove for an insider threat to be able to get, highly sensitive information.
I am always amazed at the criminal ecosystem's innovation. Every time we come up with a new product, every time we come up with a new business model, they figure out a way to monetize it to their benefits. And the same thing's going to be happening with Gen AI, the large language models. We've got to secure them up front. To what you've been saying, the thing that freaks me out is we can't audit them or do forensics on them very well today.
No,
And
you can't.
if you come in and there's a big investigation and you're asked to audit and explain why you made the decisions or why your system did that, I see muddy waters ahead.
I see a lot of muddy waters ahead. To me, it feels a lot like it did in the late 90s when the internet was blowing up. Things are changing at such a rapid pace that people aren't really able to keep up with it. And I know there's a lot of innovation coming with AI, but I still feel like, and I wish I didn't, and maybe it's just me being a pessimist here, but I still feel like the bad guys are ahead of us, and we're still playing catch up to, well, not to some degree, to a great extent. I mean, I look at security awareness, my field, and I see that, uh, well, in security awareness, role-based phishing is almost unheard of. We have it and maybe one other, but it's barely being done. Yet every single day at every company across the world, our people are phished based on their role. And to me, that's just one of those examples of how we're not keeping up with the threat. And we just, I'm hoping or optimistic that maybe AI can help there in getting us a little bit further ahead of the threat. I worry it's going to go the other direction, though, and we're
Well,
going to
it's
get
a
further
two-edged
behind
sword.
the threat.
Exactly. It is a two-edged sword. Um, yeah, I would say, you talk about the threat getting ahead. There's that old saying, we've got to get it right every time. They only have to get it right once. And
Isn't that true? Yeah, why would anyone
how
want to be a CISO?
and I'll push back a little. I don't know if you've heard of the cyber kill chain, but
Yeah.
it's changing your thought process from defense in depth to disruption of the hacker methodology. And with the focus on and I'm a huge fan of MITRE. They put out the CVS, they put out the MITRE attack framework. The top of that is a method of you would have to attack. You have to do reconnaissance. You have to find a vulnerability. You have to exploit the vulnerability. You have to, make your payload work. If it's ransomware, if it's stealing credit cards, you have to do command and control. And every one of those steps, and then as a CISO, I could sit down and I could say, you know, wow, I have 5 controls up here to prevent initial access, but I have no controls in lateral movement. That seems like a big fail. I'm going
Yeah.
to get rid of 2 controls over here and I'm going to go by microsegmentation and minimize, that gives me another disruption. And I like that approach because it gives me, and so you can go in and they do a great job on criminal groups and you can say, so does this criminal group show me their methodology? And it maps it out in the attack framework. Then your red team can use it, your SOC team can use it for training, and you can see, okay, these are 5 chances to disrupt that attack. So, it is that change in thought process, but now it's getting so complex. First of all, you have to know your data journey across all these hybrid environments.
Yeah. And know where your data is to begin with, too. Not just where it's going. I really like that. I think that's really, really good advice. Is that, and I've always tried to do that myself. Is when I started as an ethical hacker, and it probably helped because I spent the majority of my career running red teams, breaking into places, and I thought more like a hacker. And so to me, when I got into that CISO role, that's where I was looking at is, first, yes, I want to keep them from getting in. Then I want to keep them from being able to move around. Well, even before I keep them from moving around, I want to keep them from elevating their privileges. And I would look at all of those different aspects of the kill chain. I also big fan of MITRE ATT&CK framework. I feel like that's one of those things that particularly our blue teams, but everybody in our industry needs to stay on top of. And I know we are endlessly creating new training videos for the MITRE ATT&CK framework because we can't stay on top of it with how quickly it changes.
Well, and I love your approach to continuous training. Your company's approach to annual training is as useful as tits on a boar hog. Um, you know,
I have never used those exact words, but I might now.
and so I may have spent some time on a farm at one point, and so that's coming out. And so it has to be continuous. It has to be, something that is friendly and encouraging and reinforcing. So important. And I really appreciate the method that you used there.
Thank you. Speaking of methodologies, I'm sure you found a few tips, particularly around security awareness, that are just sort of standard practice now, but that you had probably had to learn the hard way along the way. Any sort of tips for viewers about, here are the number one thing or the top 3 things that I would, you know, recommend for anyone building an awareness program?
Um, so I think the first is it is about a culture. It is not about a skill set. I need to empower my users to understand they are accepting risk in all their actions. When they download software, they're accepting risk for the company. And so if they ask themselves, am I downloading this from a safe place? Um, you know, then that's I'm happy. They're in the culture I want. Now, should they be able to download it? That's another story. That comes back down to
I'm gonna
again
get
that
onto the
culture.
IT team for that.
that's that's another cultural question, but I want my users to kind of continuously ask themselves, it's that old joke, you're not paranoid if they're really out to get you.
And
um,
on the internet, they are out to get you.
right, and so nobody's paranoid, they're really out to get you. But I also want them to enjoy work. I want them to have joy doing what they're doing and not feel like I think they're a criminal and everybody they work with is a criminal. So
That was
that's
my
that
number one
constant balance.
complaint. Go ahead. I was gonna say was my number one complaint about working for the government was that I know that's just their standard policy, but it really did feel sometimes like you were being treated like a criminal when they're interviewing your neighbor that lived next to you for a month, 5 years ago. Um, so
Well, and I will harp on that, join you on harping on that for 1 second. The number of criminals or spies that were caught through that is zero. Um,
that's
so,
I
so,
wouldn't be surprised at all. That sounds about
uh,
right.
but then the second thing I would encourage people to do is take a business partner. And again, I'm at the CISO level. If I talk operationally and capabilities, I have a different answer. If I talk tactically and what I want to do in the SOC operations, it's a very different answer. But at the big program level, I want to be a partner. I want to be a business partner, and I want to help people understand how to go fast and secure. I want them to understand how they should evaluate the risks they're taking, not to ask me about the risk, but for us to collaborate as a partnership. When I go up to the board, I don't want to go up to the board and talk as a technical advisor. I did that early in my career. I lost so much credibility because they don't want a technical advisor. They want a business advisor at the board. And
Yes.
so we've got to change and come into this with a saying, oh, we're going to move to APIs. Hey, let me figure out how to give you hooks so you can just put it right into your dev chain and you can hook into the security and as you're building code, these are what I need, my security requirements as you're developing the code. Unfortunately, that's a skill set when we first go into something like API or Gen AI. None of my security people right now have Gen AI experience. None of them understand, machine learning, deep learning, neural nets, Gen AI. It's another skill set, which is why we're constantly learning. So that business aspect of going in and figuring out how to make it better, faster, um, and not necessarily secure, but appropriately secure.
Yes. And I couldn't agree more about the business side of things, and about how at the board level they're not looking for a technical advisor. They're looking for a business advisor. To echo that and maybe add to it, I'd go so far as to say that to me, sales and marketing are two very pertinent traits when it comes to cybersecurity. Sales from the perspective of we're endlessly selling what we're trying to do, whether it's selling it to the end user to build that culture, or we're selling it to senior executives. But marketing, I think, is a little bit less talked about, and I feel like marketing really has its place in cybersecurity. And the reason is because what is marketing about? It's about defining and crafting a message that works for an audience that you've already defined and outlined and learned about what they want to hear, and sending those messages in a way that they get heard. Well, that's all of security awareness, and you might be able to tell that I went to college for marketing. But to me, that is all of security awareness, and not just security awareness, but a lot of cybersecurity is around getting that message, crafting it in a way that people will listen. So
So
go
yeah,
ahead if you have a point.
well, first of all, my undergrad degree was in public relations, but I never worked a day in that since I went on an ROTC scholarship. So my first job was being an airborne ranger. But that aside, um, I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of cognitive bias. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes,
I know
that's what I was
I know
about to
you're,
bring up.
I know you're passionate about it. Um, so first of all, everybody's in sales, period. No matter what your role is in a company, you should be in sales. You should be figuring out how to move the revenue forward. And I agree with marketing and that cognitive bias. I enjoyed your blog on cognitive bias, your top five. Um, have you ever read the book Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion?
I think so, but if I have, it's
So,
been a little while.
so I
Um,
want to walk through the list with you here, and
let's do it.
we'll run through the list real quick, and then we'll delve into some of these. But ultimately, whether you're in sales, whether you're in, you know, espionage, whether you're in cybersecurity, we're all trying to influence people. And so there are some standard ways to influence people. And I love this book because it walks you through 6 basic kinds. So the first is reciprocity.
Yep.
I've given you something as simple as a pen, you now owe me. It's that I've done
Bad
something
guys
for you.
use that one constantly.
Right. And so, now you're in debt. The second is scarcity, fear of missing out. Hey, there's Black Friday sales almost over. It's that fear of missing out. So how many podcast invites have you gotten that only 2 seats left? The social proof, everybody's doing it.
Yep.
You need to be in with the cool kids. It's that crowd effect. And authority. I tend, if I'm doing social engineering, and when I was on a red team, best job ever.
Agreed. Agreed. I don't know why I ever decided to start a company and not stay on the red team.
Best job ever. When you call, you have a couple seconds to be needy or authoritative. I more often than not needed help because most people want to help. Occasionally I'd flip to authority. You can't switch once you start, but that authority, the boss said so, you have to do it. I'm from the government. Whatever it is, it's the clipboard when you're walking through the office. It's that authority. This is where yours and the book differed. The book says commitment and consistency, that follow through, and liking, that friends, that ability just to create, hey, we're in this together. And
Yeah.
then you have that framing bias, which the book didn't. But all of these, I think, are, I love to study fallacies. I love to study biases. If you want to interact with other humans in a way that, you can go into a conversation and get out of it what you want, then these are skills you should have. Jump in. I'm sorry, I went on way too
Oh
long.
no, I love it, and all of those I think are really not only commonly used in social engineering attacks, but highly effective. I'd add ego. I forget the name of the bias, but if you want to get an executive, ego works better than just about anything. But no, there's we actually recently put together a cognitive bias index and actually outlined 182 different biases. Gave stories around how they either can be used or how we use them. But it's those little mental shortcuts that really do make us susceptible to phishing. And so I truly believe that it's important not just for cybersecurity people, but for everybody to be a little bit more aware of those biases, because when you learn about them, you're a little bit less likely to be able to be manipulated by it. You still may use the bias every day, but when you're aware that there's attacks, it helps to prevent you from falling victim to it.
Yeah,
Um,
your brain's not going to get hijacked. And whether you're buying eggs, a car, or deciding to open an email, people are using on you constantly.
Oh, yes, they are. So we recently trained a large language model on how to detect the underlying psychological triggers in phishing emails. The biggest problem we have is differentiating between phishing. Training it on the psychology was easy. Training it on the difference between phishing and advertising, a little bit more difficult. But it is used on us absolutely every day. That is, I mean, to me, social engineering and marketing are almost identical. That the real difference between an unethical social engineer and a, we'll say, ethical marketer, I put that in air quotes just for everyone watching, but no, and an ethical marketer is that the marketer has to they're constrained by the truth. It's not that they can't go, slightly outside the lines, but if they go way outside the lines, they lose consumer trust, they get financial penalties, they get the company sued. Whereas the bad guy, they're using these same tactics, but they can make up any story they want. And that is where it gets really dangerous to me. Um,
Absolutely.
have you studied any other like behavioral science? Because one of the areas that's adjacent to this that I'm really interested in is how we can apply behavioral science to cybersecurity. So I'm just curious if there's any principles maybe that you've studied, or just any psychology that you found helps in day to day building your security awareness programs.
Well, I would say, you know, um, using those techniques is goes back to somewhat to intent. Whether you're using, social engineering or marketing or influence for good or bad is kind of in the eye of the beholder, I'll say. But when it comes
Fair.
back to it, um, it's always, I say culture. It's about the relationships. And there are a number of techniques. Here at Akamai, we'll use a Gallup. I remember in the military we used Myers Briggs, and I'm not saying that's a scientific method. I understand that. Uh, my wife and I go to Enneagrams class so that we talk about the framework of our discussion and not about each other. Um, so I think all of those are, again, I'm not sure it's answering directly to your question because they're less science than relationship frameworks that I think help you build the smaller team network that you want to. So I found those useful in the team level. For the bigger culture ones, I don't know that I have anything off the top of my head. Do you?
I think all of those are really great bits of advice. I mean, a few. To me, one of the most critical behavioral science principles that I think applies here and to social engineering is identical elements theory. And it talks about how when we become really familiar with anything, we're going to start seeing it more frequently. It's the reason when you buy a new car, you start seeing that car all over the road. And I bring that up because the subconscious to me is your body's natural defense or built in defense mechanism. And to put it in cybersecurity terms, it's your body's or your brain's built in EDR, but it has to be trained. Just like these large language models have to be trained with large amounts of data to be able to function properly, so does your subconscious. And what's interesting is in almost every incident, almost every time somebody reports that they clicked on a phish when they're reporting it, they say, "Oh, I knew better." And that "I knew better" is, to me, is them saying, "Hey, I ignored a red flag that I shouldn't have ignored, and it led to this." And so to me, that tells me that we're not training our users to trust their gut enough. I don't even think I got training on what my gut truly was until I picked up a book that described it. Because to me, like, I don't know, growing up, there wasn't a lot of training on trust your gut. I mean, I think I heard Oprah say it a bunch, but outside of that, there wasn't a whole lot of training there. And I think to me, that's
Sure.
the number one
Yeah.
thing that can help us avoid cyber attacks.
Yeah, it almost goes back to Gladwell's blink concept of, your first impression is probably right. Uh, and his book
Probably.
was all about that. And it goes back to the micro expression, and you can go get training in micro expressions, and all of that is just, it's a challenge of, because it's almost saying we have to be hyper aware all the time, and we can't.
That gives me
And
a
that's,
headache.
yeah. And so um, I think it is exactly what you says. When you have a twinge of intuition,
Pay
stop.
attention.
Just pause. Just pause for a second and ask yourself why.
Yeah.
That's great advice.
And emotion. We're not supposed to feel emotion. Maybe anger, but outside of anger, we're not supposed to feel a lot of emotion in our inbox. And I make jokes about anger because we've all got that email that just annoys us. But to the same regard, if you get excited about an email and you want to jump up and down, chances are it's a fish. And so I think emotion's a really big trigger too, and one of those red flags we just gotta teach our users to pay attention to.
Yeah,
We are.
I
Oh, go
tease
ahead.
everybody. I only have two feelings: anger and hunger.
Anger and hunger.
The only two
I've got
feelings
a
you need.
couple more than that, but I mostly have two feelings, if I'm being honest. Okay, so KPIs, we haven't hit on it yet. We actually missed quite a few of the many topics I typically cover today, which is great. It means we've had a good conversation. But I always do like to ask because I've received a very varied, I guess, different responses around this. But when you measure your security awareness, what metrics to you are the most important and the most telling?
So I think we'll do two. We'll cover maybe the broader program view and then more of a social counter social engineering phishing view. At the broader view, where am I going to get the biggest return on investment in reducing risk? And so for me, the first is my monitoring and response ecosystem. So it is that the SOC, the counter fraud techniques I'm deploying, my threat intelligence group, my forensics team, making sure that's all integrated. And then the kind of metrics I'm pulling out of that are everything from what is my time to resolve an incident? Where am I getting my incidents from? Those workflow kind of return on investment things are what I try to pay attention to. Now, within the SOC, they think that's the most annoying thing to track because they're doing the real battle. So I acknowledge that. The next is I can't protect what I don't know about. So the next is my situational awareness. Now, situational awareness is different than visualization or visibility, in that you contextually understand the danger. So not only do I know where the data is, I know what's proprietary, what's regulated data, PCI, credit card data, or healthcare data, or whatever kind of data it is, privacy data. Um, so it's that vulnerability and asset management, because I can't protect what I don't know about, and I can't talk about risk if I don't know where I have technical debt. And then the last one for me is identity management. It's all about making sure, you talk a lot about rule base in here, making sure that people have the right access and only the right access. Um, and we all know most of our audit findings are from people not getting permissions turned off.
Yep.
Um, but
The whole Snowden thing was about him not getting permissions turned off. I
right.
think that's the part a lot of people don't realize was that was privilege creep and almost nothing else.
Then on a tier two, I'll throw in, I need to make sure compliance is working. I need to make sure that my third party and SaaS stuff is done. I want to track, all my budget and spending, and be able to talk to, am I getting a return on risk reduction from my spending? But all of those are the broader, the mean time to kind of stats are very tactical stats, but I have a ton of them, obviously.
Okay. Great advice. What about your security awareness program? You said you had a few different ones
More
there.
on more on the phishing side. The first is, you have to do validation. You have to do pen tests to validate your infrastructure. You have to do testing of exercises, a red team, blue team, tabletop exercise to validate it. And I think you need to do some technical things like checking for phishing emails via phishing, smishing, typical emails, all of those. Wherever you have vectors of attack, you should do validation testing. And then it's, the click, we'll do the email. Who opened it? Who clicked on it? Who reported it? Fine. What I really care about is repeat offenders. Who's not getting it? And how can I change their perception? I want to know how much of it is external. What am I stopping at the perimeter and what's getting through? Because I've got to support my people with technical controls. I've got to protect stuff coming in. I need a secure web gateway stopping them from going to, when you send me that thing that I can get a free disc for disc golf, which I love frisbee golf, I'm going to click on that.
You're going to get
And I need,
spearfished now because of that.
and I need somebody to stop me from going out to pretend I'm getting a free frisbee.
I almost fell for a fish I created to fool people like myself one time. So it was a LastPass master password fish. I'm like, oh, this will get almost anyone using LastPass. And then it comes in my inbox, I don't know, a couple months later. I'm like, wait, what? Oh, you're not going to get me. I mean, talking to myself, I guess. But
and I'd say the last one is around password management. Stop reusing passwords. Don't use your work password, and your home passwords is the same thing. Passwords are still here. They're still painful. We're doing a lot more with single sign-on. We're doing a lot better with multi-factor, but I need people to get themselves a password manager and manage their passwords.
I couldn't agree more about passwords. When I was running red teams, we could tell the season based on the most common password in the network because all of our password policies were like 8 characters long, 3 out of 4 on complexity. And you have to change it every 3 months. Well, what does that lead to? Spring 2024, summer 2024, winter, fall 2024. And it was so easy to get into almost any network. And it actually got to a point before they finally updated that, most password policies. We still sometimes see the 8+ character one. But what it led to was this scenario where phishing wasn't the easiest way in the network. Password spraying was the easiest way into the network. And we almost never had to phish for, quite a few years there. And, we'd go out and talk at these conferences and scream, listen, we got to fix passwords. But
if you haven't gone to, what is it, Pawn? I've been pawned.
Have I been pawned? Yes.
Have I been, you need to go out and see how many times I think last time I checked, that was 8, which it feels low to me.
I think I'm up to like 30 or 40. So if you're only at 8, you're doing good. So,
but I will tell you one story that I was sitting around and one of my daughters said, well, I used our family password. And I'm like, what the bleep did you just say? She says, yeah, I used our family password. I'm like, we have a family password?
Before I was in cybersecurity, we had a family password. I mean, I guess we sort of did because my dad had this password that he used for everything. And then I started putting it on stuff that I didn't care about where I would have to share the password.
So I have a no risk password. If it's something that's no financial or personal risk, then yes, I use the same throwaway password. Well, somehow that got translated to the family password, and that's what they were using for everything. So yeah, it's just, you never know what's going to happen despite what you intend.
Or how your statements will be just grossly misinterpreted. So
It's always interesting to try to overhear what your kids think you do for a living.
Yeah, I'll bet. Yeah. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure. Before we wrap up here, any sort of last words of wisdom for our listeners?
Yeah, I would say, From the bigger point of view, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Think about your strategy. And the corollary to that is a strong security culture eats social engineering for breakfast.
Yeah, it does. Culture is everything. I couldn't agree with you more. All right. Well, thank you
Thanks
for
so much.
joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. And for everyone